I think a lot of people are facing what you're, when you came out, a lot of people are hitting the United States right now from an immigration standpoint. So that's part of why I wanted to do this interview, is because there's a lot of people that are down and out trying to figure out a way to, to make their mark. What was it that you obviously you went from hay hut, mud hut, to now I just talked to you before we started here. You're doing multiple transactions in real estate. You're living in Utah. You're becoming educated. You obviously got the Horatio Alger Award, and so what are how did you change your mindset to to that next level?
So I was four, and this organization called IOM, they actually, came to the village and said, "Hey, do you want to go to America?" And I was like, "What is America?" You know, coming from a third world country, being a 4-year-old, I was like, "Does America even exist?" And I just knew that Asia there was only one continent. Like, I wasn't educated about the 7 continents. We started the process. Again, my dad said, "You know what? Let's not go. We don't know where we're gonna go. This is too scary. We have never made that risk. In life, you gotta take risk, right? We had never made that risk, and we were just too scared. My dad was too scared, and my dad didn't want to come. But then we convinced our dad, and finally we started the process. And it took us 1 year, and then finally, after so much convincing, they finally, said, "Okay, you can go to Utah." And that's how I got here, from the refugee camp. And yeah, it's definitely a fascinating story for sure.
And so did they end up like getting jobs and working?
So obviously, as I said, like the first 2 years, we didn't really have a job. And eventually my dad did get a job at a restaurant. He would walk, I don't know if you guys are gonna believe this or not, but he would walk 6 miles during 2 a.m. in the morning, back and forth during snow. You know how Utah is, so snowy, right? And he would walk back and forth, no car, nothing, and that actually helped us survive.
All right. So what is it that you see now? Obviously, you moved up. You've gotten educated. You've gotten your real estate license. You're now, we're going to get into the whole, your real estate career. You hopped on to, you got associated with Horatio Alger. Where are you headed, do you think?
I love education, and education is something that I love. And like I said, growing up in the refugee camp, I did not have lots of education, right? And so coming here, looking at the opportunities, I've had so many opportunities to chase. And without education, I wouldn't be where I am today. And entrepreneurship was for me. you know I shadowed pilots. I wanted to become a doctor, but with the goals and the why that I have, that didn't really fit me. And so entrepreneurship, what do entrepreneurs do? They solve problems. So I wanted to solve problem. And I think where I'm headed with the business that I've started and what I want to do in the future endeavors is I think it's unreal. I want to get into the development side, learn, the multifamily side, obviously, building buildings and own some units. And I really feel like real estate is the way for me to serve my community as well, because as a Horatio Alger scholar, we're meant to serve, right? And we're meant to solve problems. And as a philanthropist myself as well, I want to solve that problem. I want to go back home and, and provide so many resources that those other kids don't have. And it's through real estate. And I can firmly believe that.
So let's talk about how you got into real estate and why you love it so much.
Yeah. So, when I was 14 years old, obviously I was in scouts. And so I found a couple of my mentors who were in real estate, who flipped houses and stuff like that. And I used to go bank sheetrock. I was a hustler. I passed out flyers, but that's where I got introduced to real estate. I was like, okay. I looked at the flyer. It said, "I'll buy any house in any condition." Back in my mind, I knew what this was. And then, I slowly had to wait. Everything at that time, everything takes time. And so I got with a couple of my friends, my school friends, and that's where I got into wholesaling, but before that, I bird dog for realtors here and there. I passed out flyers. I went and worked with, with my mentors, where they flipped houses. And that's where I got introduced to real estate, honestly.
You obviously had some mentors and coaches along the way. So
Yep.
this is I don't know the answer, but did you pay for these coaches and mentors?
Unfortunately, at that time, I did not have the financial necessities to pay. So what I did was I offered them value, because in life, you got to offer value to someone, right? Whatever a value that you offer, that's the same value that they're going to give you. And early age, I learned that. And if you can do that and provide more value than they provide value to you, you'll win 100%. And I promise you. And that's something that I learned quickly, and that's, like I said, I read books. Robert Kiyosaki, which your dear friend of yours, Ken, and he really changed my mindset, and I read a lot of books like Think and Grow Rich, and books like that, thinking and really the mindset, right? Because as human, you gotta take control of this. If you don't, then the motivation comes and goes, but this has to be on point, and your why and the vision that you have. That's when you really push forward, and so that's how we got started, Ken.
So something that I like that you said is you have to offer them value, right? So you hear people all the time that say, "Hey, I want Ken to mentor me," or whoever. I can't find a mentor. It's not the same as, "Hey, I will do whatever you need me to do to make this valuable for you. I want to be mentored. What do you need that I could provide?" Just because you don't have any money doesn't mean that you can't find a good mentor and progress. You just have to do it differently.
Well, I think, first of all, that was a magical answer, Ashish. Honestly, it was a magical. It was perfect.
Was that scripted?
No, I don't even know what you were going to say. But the point I wanted to try to make, I assumed that you scrapped it out and found one. The point I wanted to make is that you do not need money to find a good mentor. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and the reason why I would agree with that is because, a lot of people, they think that, okay, yeah, I have to provide them money and I'll get whatever they're going to give me, which is true. It can be true, but there is an option B, right? Which is to give your time, approach with this idea where it's too hard to resist. And I think that's one of the best thing, a 19-year-old like myself can do right now, or a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old or 11-year-old who want to become an entrepreneur can do. And I highly agree on that.
Yeah.
But no, explain like what these deals are, because the audience doesn't know like what real estate you have or anything like that.
Yeah. So obviously it's called quick flipping, or where you have a assignment fee, right? And so basically what I'm doing is, or whole word is wholesaling. But what I'm doing is I'm having, I'm talking to the seller like, "Hey seller, I see that your house is distressed. I'm a local investor, I say my speech, and then not a speech, but conversation, sales skill. But and then what I do is I go there and I look at distressed properties, and I'm the middleman, just collecting a fee. And don't get me wrong, I'm not those people where I collect this kind of fee, because there's a lot of people out there in this industry who want to collect this fee and take advantage of the sellers.
Like
but
a big fee,
I don't do that. I take what I need to take, and pretty much I flip the contract to an actual investor. And so that's what I do. And ever since I've started, it's been working out great.
So you're finding a stressed real estate and bringing it to investors and taking a fee.
100%.
Right, so you're not buying the property, you're the middleman. So you get a fee for kind of finding the investor for this distressed property.
Yeah.
But this is step one. This is a really important. This is why I brought it up. Because this is finding the deal is the hardest part. Finding the money is actually, don't you agree? It's actually not that hard. Now that you're in the game, do you see how easy the money is?
Yeah. Like, private lenders, obviously, you can look a lot of lenders, obviously, to fund your deal. In real estate, what I have found, I've been in real estate for, 3.5. So, it's going to be 4, this year. So, what I've realized is that, it's about relationship game, right? And how loyal you are, right? And also it's about a numbers game. And so when you look out there, you can see people, they want to give you money. They really do. They want to give you money. And an actual flipper, they're getting money from a person who actually have money. And so I've seen that, Ken. Yes, I've definitely seen that.
Yeah, and wholesaling is a great way to get started. You don't need any money to start. You need a lot of hustle to start, because,
yes.
How many people do you think that have a distressed property before you find one that wants to actually sell it?
Oh man, we also have cold callers, so yeah. So, cold callers call about probably like 5,000 a week, 5,000. Well, I'll say 4,000, but yeah, but it's no, it's a hard business, but guess
Yeah.
what? That's the fun beauty of it, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, but guess what? This business also led me to having a financial success than I would have at a normal 9 to 5 job. I certainly make more than they do, not to brag, but it has definitely led me to make more money, than a normal job. So, but guess what? That's business. That's where that's where it gets exciting, So yeah.
Yeah, when I love that because, I think that people, oh, I'm going to wholesale. I'm going to call 10 people. And then when all 10 say no,
They
I'm done
quit.
with this,
Yeah.
And so you have to call thousands, but it's if you can hustle, it's a great first step into real estate. We always hear, why wouldn't someone just list their house? So like, why the people that you run into that actually want to sell their house, why won't they just list it on Zillow?
If I were to go in, as a realtor right now, like, right, to a person who has a distressed property, right, and then I would look, I wouldn't like it. Things are messed up. Roof is, needs a lot of work. So basically, it needs a lot of work. And if you want to take that to the MLS, a first home buyer wouldn't buy that, right? Wait, what am I doing? Paying top dollar for a house like this? Oh no. So they want people like us, and some people have that financial, requirement that they have to go through from their side that we can fulfill, and it's a good thing because we're solving problem, right, and we're providing value.